This is the Lockpicker 1969, and welcome to my channel, and welcome to the next episode of Challenge Lock Workshop. Today's interview is with challenge lock maker PickSmith. Say hi.
Hey, TLP.
So, how long have you been making challenge locks?
Not too long. I think my first one I made about a year ago, which wasn't even supposed to be a challenge lock. Um, which was a funny story because I had been picking them and being a locksmith, and so it's like, it was a natural thing to start trying to make pins. So one day I had a little time in my van and chucked up one in my Dremel and kind of made this horrendous looking spool and went, okay. And I don't have the tools in my van that I do in my shop. Then I took a cheap cylinder from GLS, and I just made spools, different varying spools, and did some bottom pin modifications. I just took all the existing pins and then put some serrations, maybe an overset trap in one, and then said, okay, let's see what countermilling's like, and put countermilling in every single one of the chambers, and then put it back together again and went to pick it, and it took me 40 minutes to pick it, and it's like, okay, this sucks. It was funny. Now when I actually sent to Mr. Paradise, Sir Paradise, to see what he thought of it, I called it NACL, not a challenge lock. And I actually numbered it 0.5 because it wasn't meant to be my first challenge lock, but it just ended up being my first challenge lock.
A little side note, I don't know if you were aware or not, maybe you were. He has sold everything, and he's living the life, living on the road with his family in like an RV type thing.
On Hawaii? Interesting.
I think I don't know I don't remember if they're in Hawaii or if they're back or if they're in the States. I don't know, but
Interesting.
he
I
has
hadn't heard that.
yeah, he's got a video up. You might want to check that out. So, anyways, back to business. So,
Exactly.
was your first challenge lock for your blue belt or?
No, I was just making challenge locks. So I hadn't been pursuing the belt process at that point, and just made it. But I had always intended my first one to be completely different. I had already picked the name and the lock and who was going to get it. And he just got it. It was going to Harry Bow because he sent me so many. So I had always said my first lock, my first ever real challenge lock with intent is going to Harry Bow to pick it. And so I made Sergeant Cheese Badger out of a Sergeant cylinder and made it as hard as I could picture in my mind of it being. And it made it so difficult that I was never able to pick it. I think I spent 8 hours trying to pick that. And it actually ended up going to Harry after I had made another 10 challenge locks or more, because he only got it maybe like 5 or 6 months ago.
Oh, okay.
And he posted pictures a couple days later of it picked, and he's like, that is a royal bitch. So that was fun. And then he sent it to DMAC afterwards, a little bit of payback. DMAC was able to pick it. And he did a great video on it for me just to show it, because he couldn't pick it on video, but he tore it apart and broke it down to show what was in there. So that was a lot of fun to see.
Okay, that's cool. So, how many challenge locks would you say you've made at this point?
I have made 18, and I just started number 19 today, but my numbering system's off a little bit because of 0.5 and then starting at 1. So I'm making number 18, which is really number 19. So people are a little confused when they see my portfolio of challenge locks, because it's like, you have 19 here, not 18, but it's not the way that I number them because I never wanted the first one to be my first one.
Okay, so of your 19 challenge locks, Which one
Yeah.
do you feel was the most difficult lock to make?
Um, difficult to make.
Yep.
I they've all been kind of easy. In a sense, to me, making the pins and creating the pins and trying a two-piece pin, threading, countermilling, all kind of comes naturally for me.
Okay.
And I'm also very creative in creating different spools or ways to make them. Um, so I haven't had anything that's been really difficult. It's more of honestly, the thing that's been the most difficult for me to do is to actually make an easy challenge lock. Um, I've sent out three. Well, I was trying to make some for some other locksmiths. One was for Rubber Band. One was for Baba Black Sheep, who's a local guy here who has made a challenge lock, but he has actually become a locksmith here in San Diego. Um, but the first locks that I was going to make one for Tinny too, and I made it too hard. So I have to try and think of the picker's level as well too, and put it together. Rubber bands was the first one that I tried to do that way, and I went, okay, these pins are nice. I like this type of pin. There's a couple pins that I always go to, and they're actually harder to pick than you would expect, and that's the hourglass and the trampoline pins. They're
Mm-hmm.
just wickedly hard to pick for some strange reason.
Hmm.
Um, but I made one for rubber band, and I was calling it either easy or it was called too easy, and I made it even before I picked it, and I put it together and picked it and went, no, this is not easy at all. And so I had to make another one that I felt was easier because I was trying to go for like a 10-minute pick at
Uh-huh.
my level, and I finally did it just with more basic stuff.
Okay.
Um, and that was the same thing working on the one for Tinny. I wanted to create a lock that I was making pins based upon, in my mind, uh, what makes a pin not give the feedback that it should and make it harder to pick. And so I made all these pins, put it together, and it's like, oh my God, this thing is a royal bitch. I can't send this to Tinny. Tinny is not in that type of picking level. And that one actually ended up being called Foul Language because it was so difficult. And I sent it to Sadistic, and he still has not been able to pick it. Um, so I think my hardest thing is that I tend to make locks a little harder than I think they would be. Um,
Well,
and I've been surprised.
yeah, I mean, you're testing your locks though based on your ability, so
Yeah.
it might be
And knowing what the pins are and what's in there.
yes. So,
Um, and that's what I did with Foul Language. I ended up having to progressive pin it. I put the first three in, picked them, put the back three in, and picked them, and went, wow, these are harder than I expected. You put all six in, and you're like picking a U9. It's like, okay, whatever is this? I don't know.
yeah. So, so you've made locks for specific people, but the locks you've made that you intended to just go out there and be in the community, which one do you feel has been the most difficult lock for the community to open? Not the ones that there hasn't been an open per se, but ones that people have been able to actually get open, but it's difficult for them.
Um, of the ones that have been picked, and it's interesting too because there's a lot that have gone out that haven't been picked. But I'm hoping this one will get back out there. I made one called Executive Decision.
Yep.
Uh, so the way it's set up is that in one direction you pick it counterclockwise,
Yep.
and it's only the pins. So I made tough pins, made them difficult, and wanted them to be difficult. And so there's an arrow pointing to the counterclockwise going hard. And then pointing to the other direction, it says harder. because in that side I did milling on half of the chamber. So one direction you're picking against a blank wall of the chamber, and the other side you are adding in counter milling.
Okay.
And
That's cool.
so one way is much harder than the other. I picked it both ways and found it fun and not super difficult, but people are finding that one to be difficult to pick. Lady Locks ended up getting it. She picked it both directions, but it just was not a quick and easy pick.
Okay.
So, and it was first sent to Brandito, and he got it both ways.
Cool.
But it's stuck now with a guy who's got life issues that he's communicating with me, but he needs to get it out at some point.
Yeah. I think
But we won't go into that.
Yeah. So, so when you sit down to make a new challenge lock, and let's say it's, well, I guess it could be specifically for somebody or be one you intend to send out into the wild. What inspires you when you sit down and make a new one?
Typically, it's something that's caught my attention, or I mean, I kind of do a couple different things. Is that one that I sent to Lady Locks called Silent Hill? I had heard the name. Somebody was using it as a challenge lock name, and I loved the name, and it just inspired me to make this crunchy, ugly pick. And it's not easy. It's not hard. It's hard and not an easy pick, and it has a lot of fun to it. Lady Locks was not able to pick that one. Sometimes it's somebody's name. I made one for Midas on Facebook, and that one's called Golden Curse because of his name. And sometimes it's just the lock. It's like I just started one today, right before we jumped on talking, and he's a blue belt picker. And so I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm going to make you something that's in a difficult keyway. It's in a Yale 8 keyway, so that paracentric Y1 keyway. But I'm not going to make it so difficult that you shouldn't be able to get it, but I'm going to make it as hard as I can. But everything about the lock is it's factory. It's the first time that I haven't made a challenge lock, made the key for it, because most of the time I'll pick a lock, I'll pick a key, or I'll make a key. So I make a key that's really tough that I know is going to be a tough to pick. You know, a real high lift in the first one, maybe a deep one farther back, but nothing that's ever a zero lift or that type of stuff. So in this one, it's a Yale factory key. I'm using all the factory pins in it. I just came up with the name of it today. I'm calling it Yale Made because everything is going to be factory about it. The pins that I'm using, the key, and I'm working within the key structure itself. And the key itself isn't all that hard because the first 3 cuts have some nice variation in them to where I can do some real work there. But then the next 3 pins are all pretty deep with very little movement. So it's like, what can you do to make that a little bit harder? One of them, it's an 8 cut in a Yale, and that one, you just have to touch it and it'll move up. So what can you do to that? Well, you can throw in a tapered T-pin. Mm-hmm. There's the next one is a 7 cut. So it's like, okay, a smaller diameter tapered T-pin just to annoy the hell out of people. There's enough room in the back one, which is a 5 cut, where I'm going to be able to just barely counter mill and made a spool with a taper on the end of it. So when you start and you trigger the lock, it should actually lock up and make it feel like that the pin's not going to move until you counter rotate it. So, sometimes you have to play within the lock itself, and the lock and pins give me the inspiration of what can I do? What do I think I can do on this? And I've learned a lot just like looking at Perry bows as I pick them and dissect them and play with them. And he'll do some interesting things too. He'll put like counter milling halfway down and not up at the top to trap and lock a pin like that. And it's like, wow, okay. Or I've actually seen him do a double counter milling before, one deep and one up high. And it's like, it just is a pain in the butt. So when you pick enough of these locks and you see what some of the masters do, what Albert LaBelle, Den Brass, and Harry do, and DMAC, it's like, it just gives you ideas and different ways of playing with it. It's the same thing. Another inspiration has been the Nymph NF2 lock, where the lock is full of spools and tapers, and it's a pain in the ass. So learning and using taper sections in pins is hugely beneficial and a major pain in the butt.
Yeah.
For picking. That's one of those fun things of trying and playing with. It's not just about serrations and spools. It's about, okay, I'm going to add a serration onto the end of the spool, or I'm going to do a reverse tapering that's thin on top that gets wider so it feels wrong going up. Sometimes you'll do it the other way and it'll fall back down and you kind of have to inch it back up again. Certain pins feel different ways.
Sure. So you mentioned your favorite pin, or one of your favorite pins being the hourglass. Wanted to run an idea by you in what about like an hourglass spool?
Well, that's what they are. The hourglass is a spool that was created by Asa way back when.
No,
Just that.
I mean actually creating a channel in the center where it gets the most narrow and actually create an actual spooled type channel there that has a crisp drop off right in the middle.
I guess I'm not understanding. Are you talking about the chamber that it sits in,
Um,
or the pin itself?
the pin itself. So
Because the pin itself is there's been variations of it.
yeah, I'm
Um,
talking about a variation.
okay, yeah, because Prince makes I call it the Prince Special because it was the first place I'd seen it. Was basically these two shallow or real deep hourglass rounded sections in a spool with these real thin lips, and so it's like you're having to lift this up once and get it past the counter milling, and the second section comes into play, and that curvature of the pin that interacts with the wall or the top of the counter milling really, because it acts as a reverse taper, that it's hard to push against and get it to move. It almost kind of like locks up in there. And I didn't say it's one of my favorites because my favorites are
Okay.
different pins. It's one of the shapes that I consider harder to pick than most others.
Okay. So what are your favorite pins then?
One of my favorites is one that Sadistic Picker made in his first one, and I didn't know what to call it. So I ended up calling it a honey stick. So it's basically a spool, a narrow-waisted spool that's just a straight post, and it comes down, and he made his into like the shape of a top, the old-fashioned top.
Okay.
So it was like a tulip flower shape thing, but then there's deep serrations in it too.
Okay.
Um, and so it's a spool that transfers into a serrated pin that has tapering, and it is a freaking pain in the ass. Um, I love that pin because of how hard it is to pick. And I've made a bunch of different variations. One went into Sergeant Cheese Badger, and I've used it a lot of times. I put it into the spool training device cylinder that I made for people to learn how to practice and play with pins.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's a fun pin. Um, and I've been making some other ones that are now kind of favorites too. A pin and pin with a gin head on it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that thing's a pain in the butt. Um, I need to. There's a couple pins and some mods that I've been doing for deep fall sets. HV Logic just picked it. Whack-a-mole. but all the pins are bent in it. So I need to revise it so it can go out in the wild and not be beat up real hard, because they're
Yeah.
super skinny posted jig head
Yeah.
spool.
Somebody using a lot of tension is going to have a field day with that.
Exactly.
So
So
in
yeah.
your lock making, pin making, your modifications, what are your go-to tools for making those outside of a Dremel and files?
Well, and I'm not using a Dremel.
Okay. Okay.
I'm using a Fordham, which is basically a
A lathe.
Dremel on steroids. It's what jewelers use.
Okay.
I bought it because I wanted to use it in pick making, and it's beautiful for that and cutting and engraving and doing other stuff. And it has switchable ends on it, so I've got like a drill bit one that pops on, or I can go to this quick connect that has a 3/32 quick collet on it. You just flip it open, pull it out, stick the next one in, snap it shut again.
Cool.
Really cool stuff. As for tools, it's needle files, a jeweler's saw, which I feel is just a need
Yep.
because I love how skinny those blades are. They're just wickedly skinny. Sandpaper, the jewelry burrs.
Yep.
That's really it. I mean, because I work with a triangle, a square, a round, a flat, needle files, and I bought a nicer set of the Grobets in a fine, I think it was a 2 or a 0 cut, just because I wanted as small as I could get, and they work really nicely. But I always start my pins. I was watching your spool video, and you start with a file. Well, I always
Yep.
start with a jeweler's saw. If I'm going to make a spool, I take the jeweler's saw and I run serrations where I want them to. And if I'm going to variate and make it a taper one way or the other, I make one shallow, the next one deeper. And then I take the different files and to create the curves or the flats or the squares that I want to cut down into them. And I just use that as, okay, I can get my tools or my files to bite in those little grooves, and then just work my way and shape my pins that way.
Sure. Yeah, I just use a needle file, cut zero needle file to
Yep.
get kind of the line started where I want it, and then use a pillar file, a side of a pillar file to then get in there. And it works for me. So not everybody's approach is going to be the same, and that's kind of one of the great things about this is we can learn all kinds of techniques from one another. So
Exactly. I mean, that's what I found in pick making, that everybody has their own way and we all find our own way to do it. And this is the same thing with pin making. I watched a bunch of DMAX videos and went, oh, okay, that's not all that difficult, and just chucked it up and started playing and found what worked for me and what didn't work for me.
Yep. Now,
And it's funny. I see you and Lennon Spikey and a bunch of other people that will take solid rod stock and make their own pins. I have not done that yet. I have bought some stock because I needed some 3 mil stock because I want to do a GG. And those pins are actually bigger than all the other standards. It's actually a true 3 millimeter pin, where the others are a little bit smaller. But I've only worked with existing pins out of pin kits or the locks themselves, just because it's what I have. And I hadn't tried it. I have 3 mil or 1/8 inch stock that'll work, but I've never tried making my own pins completely from scratch before.
it works really well for driver pins. I still use standard key pins, just because I hate trying to shape the portion that interacts with the key and get it just right, because any little bit off there and it drags on that key, and you're going to have a key that just does not work well. So I try to stick with standard key pins, but I'll chuck those up and change them, no problem. So I think the only time I've ever gone with something besides standard key pins is when I'm using like threaded rod to make an actual key pin out of. So, but you experienced that.
I have experienced it. I haven't done it myself because anytime I do a serrated, I try and make them like Albert LaBelle. Albert LaBelle probably makes the single best looking serrated pin you've ever seen in your life. They're a lot like Harry's. They're absolutely perfect. Just perfect spacing, perfect depth,
I'll tell
all the
you,
way up and down the pin.
I'll tell you what you could try out that might give you that same type of outcome is that dang hobby saw. Jay Gabriel sent one to me. I
Yeah,
absolutely love that thing. You can put two blades on it that are side by side. It literally gives you, I think it's like a 1.5 mil spacing between the two lines, and then if you
yeah,
very carefully place your next one where one of the lines is in between the two existing, you can have some really tight lines all together, nice tight serrations, and they're
yeah,
they're like perfect. So
yep.
very very
And then
fun.
I do that with the jeweler saw, and I've gotten a couple that are like, okay, there's one that's off, but they look really good. I'm actually pretty good at spacing just with touch because I've worked with my hands my entire life. So, but it's so much fun. I love making the pins. It's just like
I
making lockpicks.
I call it's pin therapy.
Yep,
If
exactly.
I want to relax, I'll come down and I'll just make a bunch of pins. I don't really have anything in mind when I sit down. I start making them and then I'm like, okay, what about this? And I'll add this. So, oh, this let's balance this out, and we'll add that and cut it off and call it good. So,
Yeah, I've only done that once because all the pins that I've ever made I have been with the intent of being in a challenge lock
yeah,
and designed for that challenge lock. The only one that I've done that I just sat there and made one day was a piston pin, and it's like, okay,
those are fun.
this is they're a pain in the ass to make.
I was being sarcastic, but
Yeah,
okay. So, what so you said you feel the jeweler saw is the one tool you think every challenge lock maker should have in their arsenal?
I do. Excuse me, I need a sip of water. Ah, sorry about that. Um, it cuts so fine that is just unbelievable for making spools,
Yeah.
serrations. I for cutting things off.
Yep.
Um, I mean, there's a lot of other tools you need: small drill bits, sandpaper files,
Yeah. The
burrs, and other
the
stuff. But
standard stuff. Yeah.
yeah, it, when I make pins, I have needle files and a jeweler's saw. And that jeweler's saw just sharp. It bites in. You're able to reverse the blading for the teeth because, for example, my Fordham spins towards me, so it's going in a counterclockwise rotation. And I need to take the teeth and point them at my material. And you can do that with the jeweler's saw. Some of the others, you have to, you're having to turn the whole saw backwards from the way you need to
Yeah.
hold it.
Yeah.
Because the jeweler's saw is actually meant to be used in a vertical position where you're cutting along a path that's straight in front of you, and that saw is your handle's pointed straight at the ground,
Yep.
and your teeth are pointed towards the handle, so you're cutting on the downstroke, not on the upstroke. Well, with the Fordham or a Dremel, they probably spin about the same. You need to reverse that so the teeth are pointed at what you're cutting, and that holds true for any saw you're using. That the teeth need to be pointed at the material, otherwise it pulls towards you when you go to cut on it, and it's not effective. It actually needs to bite and go against the way you're spinning.
Mm-hmm.
So, and having to learn how to use it too is a lot of fun too. It took me a while to find the right how do you use a jeweler saw, because you have to put that blade under tension. You have to, and when you're done with it, you pluck on it, and it needs to sound like a high guitar string.
Yep.
Ding, 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 ding. Um, it takes a little bit of learning and getting used to that. But once you do, that saw will can do anything. I use it for shaping my handle scales and liner in picks, cutting small little things, and they are wickedly sharp. You have to be very careful with those. They will.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
the first the first time that I cut my finger almost to the bone when I
Ooh.
slipped making a pick, and it's like, okay, never doing that again.
Ooh.
I just
Instant respect.
exactly, that's one of the things we learn with tools is that you don't really learn to respect them until they hurt you, and then you really learn your respect for them.
Have you ever tried a kerf saw?
I have kerf saws. I have
Well, you probably
a
use them for pick making, but I was wondering if you ever
I
tried using them for pins.
no, because I have the jeweler's saw. Um, the jeweler's saw is specifically made for metals and brass
Mm-hmm.
and copper and other stuff. So it's like, I have a back dovetail Japanese pull saw, and it's a .019 perf on it, which would be perfect, but it's so fine and delicate. I'm not going to use it for this. I'm only going to use it on wood, or acrylic. I
Yeah.
have another little back saw that I bought with a little one of the mini miter boxes because I wanted to do mosaics in tiny little pieces. Um, but once again, I have the jeweler's saw.
Yeah.
And the jeweler's saw, you buy a decent one on Amazon with the 60 million blades that they always end up giving you for $20, and
Yeah.
that frame lasts you for a long time. It may eventually wear out and the blades start slipping or something, and then I'll probably, when that one wears out, I'll probably invest in a real jeweler's frame saw, a German made one,
Mm-hmm.
um, because when I find a good tool, I buy it in as best as I can afford at that time for what it is, or once I learn how to use something. But that the jeweler's saw is so uh, adaptable to whatever you want it to be.
Yeah. I
And
see. I have Japanese pole saws, and I have other kerf saws I use for woodworking in the shop. I just happened to pick
yep,
one up because I liked the effect I could do with pins with it. And yes, I use a jeweler saw as well, but um, just my hands are not as steady as I would like them to be. So
yeah,
that helps me out in some respects by just keeping things really rigid and straight for me. That's worked.
yeah, and I see that benefit for everybody too.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting too because I you shared with me, and you've shared with everybody how you have that Dremel workstation. Um, so the way I make my pins is I have my bench and I have a woodworking vise, which I just open up a little bit. So I've got the flexible handle on the end, and it's a solid extruded aluminum or milled aluminum piece with a drill chuck on the end of it. That's for small micro stuff because it can clamp down to like I think point 0.5 or 0.05 of an inch for how tight it is.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I just lay it on top of that slightly open vise, and I rest my arm on it, so both my hands are holding onto the saw, and then I have a foot control for speed.
Oh, that's cool.
So I'm holding it with my arm, but I have my saw with both hands on it. So
That's
it's just
cool.
a different way of doing it.
Very cool. All right. Last question before we wrap up. You kind of
Okay.
led to it a little bit earlier, but are there other challenge lock makers that you take inspiration from beyond some of the ones you mentioned? Maybe we already know Harry Bow, and so are there any
Harry
other?
Bow, Den Brass, Albert LaBelle, D-Mac, Jake Gabriel, Peace Weapon.
Yeah, just did his interview today. That was put out this
Uh,
morning. Yep.
Peace Weapon. He hasn't made very many challenge locks, but god dang, he has made some really interesting ones.
Yeah.
I Every person to me is an inspiration because the thing that I like about challenge locks is that they're all so different, and getting to see a lot of people send me their first challenge locks because they like to send it to a good picker and pick it apart.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so I've I've been able to help a lot of people. I mean, even like Cajun Lockpick, a great guy, great picker, working on his black belt, great challenge lock maker, and getting to work with his first and send it back to him and go, here, you need an upgrade, change some things about it, and he does, and then he comes back and sends me more locks, and they're just little nightmares. It's like perfect. Kaz Breaker is another one who really is, you don't hear his name, but his locks are amazing. Bill Bacardi, he's a locksmith back on the East Coast. He's made more than Harry Bow.
Wow.
And just great little locks. We just don't see enough of them. Trying to think of any of the others that have come across my desk that I just can't remember. I mean, I've seen a lot, and have fun with every single one of them, whether I can pick them or not.
Yeah.
Luckily, I mean, even Landspike and Prince, and seeing the stuff that HV Logic, Down Under Monkey, Pixelogic, looking at the pictures that I have in the handbook for challenge lock making.
Yep.
Artwork, the amazement that people have done, and the pins that they've made. It is really just astounding that people can make so many different kinds of pins, and they're all separately unique and different. That you have three people sit there and say, make a spool, and all three of them are going to look completely different from each other, and they're all going to work and be effective.
Yep.
So the inspiration to me is this, that people are still willing to do this and make these.
Yeah. Hey, by the way,
yes,
you mentioned your guide that you put together, and I think that's an amazing resource.
Thank you.
If you could IM me the link, I will add that to this video so that our listeners can go check that out, especially for their own inspiration on approaches on making challenge locks. So
yes, not a problem there. I'll send you the direct link to my working one. It's also, there's two older versions, one on the LPU website and one on challengelocks.com. There's always a link in the LPU Discord channel. In Challenge Locks, it's a pin there, and it's pinned in a couple different places in the Challenge Lock layer on Discord. But if anybody ever wants to get a copy of it, I'll just send you the working link.
Awesome.
And you can re-look at it, because that's my working link for my actual document. And I need to there's a few more things I need to update to it, but it's really pretty current at the moment with where we are in the state of what people have been doing. So I try and keep that current. And I've also been including what I consider custom locks that are from scratch, that are designed to be tough to pick. I'm drawing a blank on his name, who did the Lockwood, or he handmade basically a Corbin Emhart in a Lockwood.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank too. Just interviewed that too.
There's a couple other designs that have been tossed in there. Diggs, Bravo, and Alpha have been put into there. Anybody that makes a custom-made hand lock like that will get added to it. It's not really a challenge lock as the tradition is, but it needs a place in our community.
Yes, it does. Definitely.
A lot of people want it, and they love listening to it and seeing the different stuff that people have done.
So, any parting inspirational words you would want to pass along to any budding challenge lock makers that are listening?
Just do it. Just buckle down and try it.
Do it and have fun.
exactly. You can do it with three things: a drill motor, your pin, and some needle files, and a little bit of sandpaper. Okay, four things. You need the pins too, but a drill, a couple needle files, and some sandpaper. You will want some finer sandpaper. I think you mentioned that you start at 400, go to 600. I actually start at 800 and use 1,000. You can do anything you want to. The rougher it is, the rougher the shape becomes and the harder it becomes to pick, but the smoother you can make it, the better it looks, more like a production pin.
Yeah.
Just give it a shot. Put a pin in there, see
definitely.
what happens. Use your imagination. Nothing's off limits, but test your locks and test your pins.
Yeah.
And go from there. One other thing I forgot to mention to you that some people may be interested in. There's been a new little wave of people doing impressioning challenge locks. So instead of working with the drivers, we're working with the key pins and how to make a lock harder to impression.
Okay.
So
all right.
that's something that's a little bit new out there. And so people who are into impressioning, you want a challenge, we can make you a challenge lock for impressioning.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for doing the interview. This has been awesome.
You're welcome. I always enjoy these.
Yeah, me too. All right, we'll wrap this one up. If you are already a subscriber, thank you. If you are not yet a subscriber, please hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications and all, and hit like on the video. And thanks for listening.